Representative Allen.
Present.
Representative Allison. Representative Ashby.
Here.
Oh, yeah. Representative Bell.
Here.
Representative Dutton. Representative Gonzalez. Representative King.
Here.
Representative Meyer.
Here.
Representative Sanford. Representative Tallarico. Representative Van Beaver.
All right, quorum's present. Thank you all for being here. A few housekeeping items before we begin to keep our hearings running smoothly. If you've been invited to testify today, please fill out a witness affirmation form electronically. The affirmation must be filled out completely and accurately. Kiosks are located in the hallway. Today, the system is set up for everybody to register neutral on public school finance. When your form is complete, please electronically sign and submit that for us. Today, the committee is going to continue to receive testimony on the Texas Commission on Public School Finance report and our school finance system in general. We hear from a number of different stakeholders and advocates on the topics over the next 2 days. Does anybody have any questions? All right, we'll jump right in. And we're going to call up panelists at a time. And so we're going to call up H.D. Chambers, Superintendent Alief ISD, Dr. Xavier De La Torre, Superintendent, what is that? Ysleta? ISD. You're going to tell me what it is. Dr. Michael Hinojosa, Superintendent Dallas ISD, and Doug Williams, TASA, Legislative Chair and Superintendent Sunnyvale ISD. Please come up to the table. Tell us who you are. And tell us how great the school finance system in Texas is. Let's go ahead and just, everybody introduce themselves for the record, and then you guys pick who's going first. I don't care.
You can go first.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, let's say Michael Hinojosa, Superintendent, Dallas ISD, representing the Dallas Independent School District and the Texas Urban Council.
Good afternoon. I'm Xavier De La Torre. I am the chair-elect of the Texas Urban Council, superintendent of the Ysleta Independent School District.
Doug Williams, Superintendent, Sunnyvale ISD, representing Texas Association of School Administrators.
H.D. Chambers, Superintendent of Schools for Alief ISD, representing Alief as well as the Texas School Alliance. And I'll go ahead and start. You want me to start? All right, I'll get through this pretty quickly. First of all, appreciate the opportunity. And what I'm here to do is I'm going to represent Alief on many of my comments, and then when I'm not representing Alief and representing the Alliance, I want to be sure that I'm not representing the Alliance in some areas in which we have not approved of that. So 5 critical things I'd like to respond to as it relates to the Commission's recommendations. And these are areas of agreement, and there's going to be a couple things I want to bring up that I believe should be part of the consideration as this committee once the bill is filed and you react to the actual bill. One, obviously, the new money in the system is appreciated. We support the differentiated teacher plan as long as it's locally developed. The extended school year component that's recommended, which allows us to extend into the summer, and the funding for that we extremely support that, and I can give some reasons for that in a little bit. The spectrum weights, redefining the weights to a broader and redefining the attributable money to those weights is approved. Is supported. And last but not least is looking at the different weights for the ELL and our economically disadvantaged students. And I want to make a comment about that real briefly. I would encourage this committee, as you go through the process of the bill process once it is filed and you start taking action on it, is to perhaps look at expanding beyond just economically disadvantaged and just beyond English language learners as to how we define the students who are most at risk. And there are several documents out there. There's a lot of work that's been done on this. Risk loads have been done. I would just encourage the committee to consider that as you move through this process, so that that we're better aligning our resources to the kids that need it. All right, I am going to respond to many of the recommendations that you heard last week from the 3 individuals who were on the commission. We completely support the amount of money going that has been recommended to go into early childhood for 3rd grade literacy. Obviously, for 3rd grade outcomes are important. My caution on the $1.4 billion that's recommended, out of that $1.4 billion, the $400 million that is tied to outcomes at 3rd grade. My request of this committee as you move through the process is to be careful with that. I highly encourage a deeper look into the assessments and to the way in which they're developed and in the way in which they're attributed to our accountability system. I know this is not a hearing on that issue, but as it relates to this topic, as being part of the recommendation from the commission, my encouragement is to have a deeper discussion on that before there's a decision.
Alan.
You want me to share it? Okay. I did just real briefly. If you recall, those of you who were a part of House Bill 4 in 2015, which was putting some funding towards pre-K, part of that process was identifying some quality standards and best practices for early childhood pre-K and specifically. And I can just speak personally from ALEF's perspective. When we applied for the money, and that was a grant program, and I would highly encourage you not to put it into a grant, but for the purpose of this illustration, that grant program, the practices that were put in place for you to access the money through the grant program sincerely changed a lot of our behaviors on how we deal with early childhood and how we deal with 4-year-olds in pre-K. And we weren't doing nearly as well as we should have. And so by us being incentivized for that money to move towards these best practices, it's made me realize that we don't have those same types of best practices or quality standards in place in kinder, first, or second either. And we get criticized quite often for having a full-day program or investing a lot of money in 4-year-olds, and some people would want to say, well, they lose that momentum in kinder, first, and second. My response to that would be, okay, then put some standards in place that we would all agree upon using a process similar to what was done in House Bill 4. Incentivize districts to put those standards in place to access the $400 million or whatever the amount is that ultimately comes out of this in lieu of an outcome. So in other words, invest in the input, I don't want to use the word force, but incentivize us to move to better practices so that we are better aligned in kinder through second grade, and perhaps we won't see some of the gaps that some people are critical of us when they look at pre-K and then third grade. So that's just a thought, just an idea. You bet. We support the CTE, the additional middle school funding for career technology education. We support moving some type of funding into differentiated teacher pay, but I want to be very clear that it would have to be locally developed with some parameters. I know part of the process may be that you'd have to get this approved by the agency or someone. I would just, again, caution back to my point with the outcomes-based funding that we're not tying everything to just a single test score. And I know you'll hear more testimony on other school districts that are doing that are doing it without just using test scores. So, but I just want to be clear on that. There's one slide that you were provided last week, and it's on page 21 of the slides I provided you, where it talks about poverty is not a destiny. And I want to, as you're thinking about putting money into the third grade literacy issue for ELL students and economically disadvantaged students, one thing we added to this slide, which was kind of a scatter plot, was we added a yellow bar, and that bar is set at 60% and higher. So that means every little dot is a school above that who scored at 60% or higher and met their meets grade level in third grade literacy. And obviously, the further to the left of that bar you get, which is the lower the economically disadvantaged students, the higher that bar is. I mean, the higher the number is. This is just trying to make the point that the money needs to go to where the most at-risk students are. And sometimes they're economically disadvantaged, sometimes they're English language learners, and sometimes there's other factors that lead to that. So just a play on that scatter plot. I'm going to go to real quickly. I'm going to go to slide number 12 in this order, where it talks about other recommendations. I'm not going to get into CEI and all that. Chairman, you made yourself very clear last week about kind of where you are on that. There'll be other people that talk about it. I guess my only request is make sure there are no unintended consequences. Not to imply that you would, but I think that's what a lot of people are concerned about, are unintended consequences. the elimination of the moving from current year to prior year, I think there's been some issues that have been brought up. You're going to probably hear about that today from people that are much smarter than me and on the school finance side of that. But we're very...
I think we've abandoned ship on that, so
I think so? Okay, well...
I'm pretty sure.
It was a point we wanted to make since it was coming out of the commission, and as we move forward. One thing I want to talk about is it relates to transportation. I know there was some discussion on how old the transportation allotment is. I would ask you to consider, as you look at transportation, somehow building into the funding a way in which to help districts cover the transportation costs that they need or they incur by offering choice within their school district. So there's a lot of districts, particularly urban districts, suburban districts, who are offering choice in multiple schools. And I can tell you in Alief, one of the problems that we have is not necessarily the desire for choice or not necessarily the desire for us to offer some type of choice program. But if I don't offer transportation from one side of my district to whatever the program is that we're offering on the other side, we have a hard time paying for it. And so as you look at the transportation funding, perhaps you could carve out that conversation and take a look at that, because that would be very helpful to a lot of districts who are continually growing choice within their own school system.
Chairman Dutton has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why wouldn't you just offer the program at the school where the bus was picking people up?
Well, because sometimes you only offer the program in a campus, and if you have students who want to participate in that program on a campus, for example, on the west side of your district, I may have students on the east side of my district that would like to all participate in it. I don't have enough to put that program in every school or on every quadrant of my district. So for those programs where they're on one side of the district and I have students who want to participate on the other side, right now, because of just their transportation challenges as a family, it's hard for them to get there, and it's hard for me to provide that to the scale I need it.
Well, why not ask us to help you fund the program at those other schools?
However I get the funding, some of it will be used for transporting students. So whether you decide we would like to fund this program, I would use money to fund the program, but I would also, in order for that program and for students to benefit from that program to the extent we would like them, I have to get them there. And so I would use some of that funding if that were to be the solution for transportation as well.
Well, you know, you're supposed to be in the education business, not the transportation business.
Unfortunately, we're in a lot of businesses other than education.
But the education business is the primary goal, right?
Correct.
And secondary may be transportation. But I, you know, because I find it strange in my district where students walk across the street to a high school to catch a bus to go to another high school. And that, I think, should be stopped. And so rather than providing transportation dollars for that, I think we need to provide the program monies so that the program they're trying to seek is at the school closer to their neighborhoods.
I would love to be able to do that, sir. I would love to be able to offer every program we have in the communities in which all our children are, but I just can't do that. I can't do that.
Well, I understand that, but let me talk about it this way. For example, there are a number of programs in Houston ISD that operate on the west side of town. And by the west side of town, what I mean is there are schools dominated not by students of color. And so as a consequence, the program is over there and not on the east side of town.
Right.
And so therefore, 40% of the students in my district get on a bus every morning to go to a high school on the other side of town, or a middle school, or an elementary school even, in some cases. And I'm just always flabbergasted by the fact that, you know, the problem would seem to be the other way around. If you offer the programs over at those schools and had seeking transportation for the students on the west side of town to go to the east side of town, I'm almost willing to bet you that they find money for the programs on the west side of town.
They may in your school district.
Yeah.
I'm speaking for my school district, and that's the
Well-
challenge I have. So
Well, I don't know that yours would be a whole lot different, at least. In fact, let me ask you this. The people riding the bus predominantly are black kids, aren't they?
sir, all I have are African American and Hispanic. So yes, they're one of those two.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And the programs they're seeking are dominated by what student population or demographics?
In my district,
Yes.
African American and Hispanic.
Okay. So the neighborhood where you're picking up students, is it affluent or is it poor?
It's poor, all of them.
That's pardon?
But I don't have any affluent neighborhood, so I understand. I really do understand what you're saying, sir.
Okay. Well, I hope so, because
But what you're comparing your school district and mine are not. Those are two different comparisons.
well,
I'm sorry.
I would hope so, but the history tells me that the problem is the same in almost every school district. Because when you're seeking more transportation dollars, generally it's because you're attempting to even almost suggest that the schools on one side of town need closing so that the students can go to the other side of town. Or what you're saying is that we have the programs on the other side of town, so therefore we need money for transportation to take those kids out of certain neighborhoods to go to the other side of town.
I hear you loud and clear. That's not my intention.
All right, thank you.
All I'm asking is that as we move as a educational system, and it seems as though that's the direction many of us are moving, and some have already gotten there, that you offer choice to a certain extent for students, transportation dollars in addition to just bringing kids to school and taking them home based on some attendance boundary would be very helpful. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that choice is not choice when it's a choice between a bad school around the corner and a good school across town.
Fair enough. Fair enough. One last thing, and I'll wrap up on my comments. And you're going to probably hear this, and you've heard it. And granted, we have not seen the bill, but in many, both in the commission conversations and in the conversations that were had last week, both on this side of this building and on the other side of this building, there's been, at least to our knowledge, there's been very little discussion on sustainable revenue to sustain some of the things we're talking about and that we would be recommending. So without sounding like or being critical about what you're talking about for this biennium and the money that you guys have identified, we've been down this road before as superintendents, and we've seen what can happen in a year or two. And just a concern that we have is what are the discussions about new revenue if indeed something were to happen in 2021 or 22 or 23 or whenever. I know you've thought about it. I know it's been discussed. I've heard Representative King talk. I've heard it, but it goes. I couldn't let this go without saying that that's an issue that it's in the back of our mind. We'd love to participate in many of the things that we're talking about, these choice programming, all these things we're talking about. But just like what happened in 2015 with pre-K, or what happened in 2009 with pay raises, we're a little gun shy when it comes to putting things in place that may or may not be funded in 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years. So that's an overarching concern. And the last thing I'll say is talking about the programs, the extended school year. I know that's a relatively small dollar amount. At a $9 billion, we're only talking about $50 million. But I am firmly convinced in my school system, and I think some of these guys would agree, that part of the issue with third grade literacy for my students is I don't have them long enough. in the school year. We let them go. We ask them to go to summer school. But that is different. And I don't care how well you try to replicate summer school to look like the traditional school year. It is difficult, and it's no one's fault. It's no one's fault for effort. But if I'm a big advocate of extending the school year so that those 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever the time frame is, looks just like the day on June the 15th looks just like the day on February whatever day this is, meaning salaries, transportation, people at work. That means heavy investment in people, obviously. But we know from just data that by letting a student, particularly those who have literacy issues, whether it's language barriers or just from the environment they come from, sending them home for 2.5 months, it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm doing it. And if I could afford to not do it, I would not do it. We pay for summer school. So to me, that is an important test case, if you will, or by you guys putting money, as long as that extended school year is truly an extension of the school year and not just another enrichment or a summer school program that we kind of all participate in right now. That's mine. So with that, I'll stop. I'll go back to just my point is, as you get ready to go through how to address funding, I really would encourage you to take a look at assessment, accountability, and talk to people who are extremely smart in these areas, not myself, before we make decisions as to how we put money associated with any type of performance. So with that, thank you.
So let me just ask this question for you real quick. You sat through, listened to our commission hearings, and while we have the requirement by federal law to maintain our accountability system and our standards, how do we measure growth of students then? What's the answer?
Well, you measure it through assessment. Okay. As long as you're using the right assessment and you're using the right types of questions, and you're measuring students based on the grade level in which they are in. There's this. Please don't misunderstand. This is not, and I know this hearing is not about testing and accountability, but this is not an anti-testing, anti-accountability issue. I'm just bringing up that many smart people, lots of smart people who do this every day, are just questioning, are things like test questions, are they valid? Is a question we're asking a third grader, is it truly designed for what we expect out of third graders, or is it not? I'm not smart enough to say it is, it's not. I just know there's differing of opinions, and those opinions are getting so loud right now that at some point it's going to have to be addressed, in my opinion. And so you measure it by assessment, Chairman, and you measure it by documenting it and holding us accountable.
Yeah. Well, I think I was very clear last week when I said that this is about, and I appreciate what you're saying. This discussion as we start this is about the School Finance Commission, and this is about funding our system on a go-forward basis for a long time and then judging it. If we have a problem with the STAR test, we have a problem where people think that it's not testing what it should be testing or under-testing, we'll look at all that. I'm assuming this panel would want to hear about testing. We'll have testing that'll come up and we can talk about it. And there'll be differences of opinion, I know, and we'll bring the people in the room. And if it ain't working right, just like when we had the problem with writing several years ago, we fixed it. So I anticipate that happening as we go forward. So,
and that would be appreciated.
Okay. All right. Yes, sir. Mr. King.
Just follow up on your funding sustainability. It's something that I've been very vocal about because I've watched us do this over and over since I've been paying attention to it. And you're right, it cycles basically with the price of oil and gas. About every 5 to 8 years we crash. Right. So my question is, whether you want to say it publicly or not, we can't continue to take it from property taxes because of the high rise of property taxes. So we're not going to get any more up from sales tax. And I have a few ideas that we're researching right now. Do you have any solutions? Because everybody I talk to, they all want more money, but as long as you don't take it from them.
Okay, I don't know that these are solutions, and they're not mine. I mean, y'all have heard, you guys have heard from some of your commission colleagues, Nicole from Austin ISD. You've heard some ideas and suggestions. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I've got any better idea than what's been looked at, but it makes sense to me, just me. This is not the Texas School Alliance. It's not even A-Leaf ISD. This is me. It makes sense to me that there seems to be so much money out there in the system that is either exempted or somehow provided as incentives, and I understand that those dollars there's a reason for that. I'm not questioning that. But it seems to me when you're talking in that neighborhood, that some of that is in the 30, 40, 50 billion dollar range. It seems to me that someone could reasonably look at some of those and identify some areas in which perhaps those are not the most productive for our state for whatever the purpose it is, that could be better used in public ed, as an example. I mean, it's almost like you have to weigh, is the value that I'm getting over here for this more important than the value I'd be getting if I put it into teacher compensation that I know would be sustainable over a long period of time? That's a decision policymakers would have to wrestle with if you were to consider something like what I'm describing. This was brought up several years ago, and I think it was brought up at the commission. I can't recall, but it's not my idea. Someone brought it up. But allowing some type of local sales tax election, perhaps somehow a local community. There's examples of that. San Antonio, city of San Antonio did it for pre-K several years ago. Those are complex things that I don't pretend to know the details on and what all ripple effects that might have. But there seems to be enough money out there that's not in the public ed system, or even health and human services for that matter, that's just being utilized for other matters. And I don't ever hear. I've never, in my personal experience, I've never heard those dollars ever discussed and value placed on where's the best value. Is it the best value to be in the economy with some type of break that we're giving, or not? Or is it the best value to be put in helping third graders learn to read? I don't know.
I understand where you're coming from.
That's like I said, there's going to be smarter people than me that could answer that question.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, committee. First of all, I do want to express my appreciation to the School Finance Commission. I was very encouraged through the entire process. They had great conversations, and I really appreciate the dedication they displayed to overhaul the system. In preparing for today, one of the things I did was I actually listened to your meeting last week, and again, I do appreciate the work that this committee does. In my opinion, you look at all aspects of these issues, and you have great conversation. I appreciate that. So in looking at the commission report, I'm going to break it down really into to two different areas. I'm going to look at commendations, things that we really believe the commission nailed, and then maybe some items for consideration as well. In relation to commendations, the first one is the commitment.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Would you state your name and who you
Yes,
represent?
sir. I'm Doug Williams.
Okay.
I am the superintendent at Sunnyvale ISD, and I'm today representing TASA.
Okay.
First commendation, the commitment to improving reading for children early in their careers. I will tell you just a brief story. My mother was hired in the mid-'60s to be a reading recovery teacher. That was her first job in public education, and she spent over 30 years in the same school district and actually retired as an elementary principal. That program was put in place in the mid-'60s because students that were entering public education were not reading at the level they needed to. And so they put funding in place to make sure that those kids were brought up to speed. And I just feel like that was very important in that. But that program influenced my mom's career. And my mom, as an elementary principal, reading was always job one. And I so appreciate the commission and the stance they took on that. I appreciate the fact that they created additional funds for students and districts that are in greatest need. And I think that if you're talking about holistically improving education in Texas, that is incredibly important. Next, injecting significant additional resources beyond what is needed for growth has to happen. And that includes an increase in the basic allotment. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. And then finally, the commitment from the Commission to reduce the reliance on property taxes to fund public education. We know that that system cannot sustain itself. We understand all the perils of rising property taxes, and I appreciate the Commission's response to that. Some items of consideration. First, outcome-based funding. And there will be other groups that are probably going to cover this in a lot more detail than what I am. I agree, and like I said, I do agree that it is very important that we improve our children's ability to read in the lower grades. And I completely understand that and agree with it. However, I'm not convinced that incentivizing districts will actually produce the results that we want to produce. We can look at whether or not dangling the carrot out there, or whatever term we want to use, but I'm not convinced that that will actually produce the results that we're looking for. Additionally, I believe that it will continue to add to the overemphasis of testing that we've seen across the state. And then finally, I believe that districts will continue to not only, they're going to continue to prepare kids for the test instead of really focusing on positive and on positive reading skills. So, in my opinion, I don't know how that system is really going to produce the desired result.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I think Representative Gonzalez has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I appreciate your testimony. I think that we hear across the state how parents and teachers are concerned with how in the last decade we have really prioritized and centered testing as part of our curriculum and part of our overall education infrastructure. And so I think what we're trying to do is kind of find that balance between making the investment in education and ensuring that the investment actually has some positive outcomes. But at the same time, I think a lot of us would agree that we don't want to continue the model that testing is the most important thing in education. So in your opinion, and so this is the first time I guess I've heard about how there might be a concern, I don't want to maybe even use that black cloud word, but a concern that tying our school finance system to testing or outcomes-based might actually perpetuate an over-reliance on our standardized testing. And so is that true? Is that what you're saying, A? And then B, how would you find that balance if you were us? And no pressure.
No, yeah. So, again, what gets measured gets done, and I understand that. But if you tie it to funding, I just look at the pressure that is already in place because of A through F, and we're not going to get into A through F in that discussion today. But if you talk, and now school districts that are strapped for cash, if they can somehow recoup cash by being able to raise test scores, what measure will they take to raise those test scores? We've had some preliminary discussions in our district. I don't want to go into a second grade classroom where they're working on STAR Prep worksheets. To me, that is not quality reading instruction. And then not only that, but let's also talk about the social emotional well-being of third graders. We've got 8-year-old kids that are now really the message that they're being given is, hey, you've got to do well on this test so somehow the district can benefit. And to me, that really again is not solid. Now, your second question, what's that balance? I think HD said it well. I think that we have to continue to have resources to provide good research-based instruction methods to improve reading scores, and yes, hold us accountable for that. We're not avoiding the accountability issue, but tying it to funds that school districts are going to receive for 8-year-olds performing on a test, to me, is just not solid.
I appreciate that, and I missed Mr. Chambers' testimony, and I apologize. I know you're really smart. But I don't think I had conceptualized how tying school finance to testing and or performance-based measures could create a second accountability system on top of the A through F system we already have. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And let me just say this. I'm advised that in E2028 is the overflow room, so if anybody needs to forget about standing, they can go over there and have a seat and still see the proceedings. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The second item of consideration is the concept of merit pay. We understand and we recognize the merit pay system has created success in some school districts, but I'm here to talk about how not all districts have the same needs. Sunnyvale ISD is located in Dallas County. We're right next door to Mesquite, and our neighbors within 5 miles is DISD. Three districts in Dallas County, but we are very different districts. And the needs of our districts are incredibly different. And they're incredibly different. The funding for those three really have to be different, and the design. In a small district such as Sunnyvale, we have one elementary, we have one middle school, we have one high school campus. So the concept of taking your best teachers and moving them to another campus really isn't applicable for Sunnyvale. And then also, if you look at, well, do we place our best teachers in, quote, areas of high need? In our school district, and when we hear from our parents, what our parents want is our parents want the performance of all of our teachers to increase, not just having some teachers that are designated as the best. So what we're requesting is that actually the high quality teacher allotment actually be broadened. It would allow for flexibilities for districts to use those funds for measures related to improving the overall instruction in the district. What would that look like? In some districts, again, if it's flexible for districts, it might be the continuation of an ACE program like DISD instituted. In our district, it could be something where we would focus on enhanced professional development for our teachers. It might be instructional coaching in reading or math or other programs where we could take those dollars and we could improve the overall instruction for all of our teachers. And again, we're just asking for some flexibility when it comes to that. The next consideration is we still be provided in the system to assist districts with geographic and cost differences beyond the control of the school districts. The need for these differences exist due to the incredible diversity of the districts in our state. Somewhere in our system, it does have to be reflective of the fact that each of our 1,100 school districts are different, and it does cost a different amount to educate kids in different areas. The last thing I would ask for consideration purposes is realize that the $9 billion is a big number, but I want us to consider the quote from Representative Meyer from last week. When we are helping schools in the state of Texas, we must help all schools. There can't be winners and losers in the system going forward, and we realize that's a big number. But I think one of the things that we've looked at in past sessions is when the system comes down, that some schools win and some schools lose. Now, I've had conversations with Chairman Hubert in the past. I think the thing that we have to avoid is when the runs come out, everybody runs to a rep, and we know that we're going to trust the process. I tell my teachers, I tell my administrators that the entire time. But we just want to make sure that the system that is in place helps all schools. The last point is flexibility, discretion in the funding system. The basic allotment has only increased 7.8% over the last 9 years. That's an increase of less than 1% annually. And because of the diversity of our state, designated funds don't necessarily address the needs for all school districts. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your consideration. We look forward to working with you through the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Two points I'd make real quick. One is you know, the cost differential that you probably are referencing, cost of education index, right? You know, one of the things that we've identified and looked at is the fact that even if we implemented a new cost structure today, it'd be outdated in 6 months. And the system that we have hasn't been addressed and dealt with. So we do have cost differentiators in the sense of the new system, I think, as a go-forward basis, meaning we kept the mid-size adjustment, mid-size school adjustment, the small rural adjustment, that's been kept and actually expanded from last session. And then when you start adding the differentiators on the comp ed weighting and the ELL, I think that we're going to see, I think that's going to make a difference, but we're certainly going to look at that. And I would encourage school districts that are out there trying to do their own runs right now, or anybody that's trying to help them do their own runs right now. I mean, I was hearing from people last week saying, oh my God, we're going to lose $100 million, and, you know, we're really disappointed in the plan. Well, you don't even know what the plan is yet. You don't even know what it looks like yet.
Yeah.
So I would encourage everybody to just, you know,
trust the process.
Trust the process.
Trust the
as we go
TTP.
forward. Yeah.
So Omar Garcia put out a new template. I don't know if everyone saw that. And the first line on it, so I'm not a miracle worker, so there's no new changes. So, you know, if Omar hasn't figured it out, nobody has. So, yeah, no question.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Tellerico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Williams, you commented on the ACE program and how that wouldn't necessarily apply to a district like yours. I didn't hear you comment on paying teachers differently based on the quality of their teaching and that facet of the educator effectiveness.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts on that. We have 160 teachers in our school district on 3, about to be 4 campuses. We're opening our 4th campus up next year. And I don't know the exact numbers. Let's say that we have 8 teachers that we would designate to be our master teachers. For one, I look at some of the logistics. Let's say we designate one teacher to be the master 4th grade teacher, or she's a 4th grade teacher that is deemed to be the best. I'd have 140 requests from parents to make sure their kids go into that section, and that's one of the problems that small school districts would face. The other one is, and probably the bigger issue, is we really believe in collaboration. We believe that our teachers learn best when they learn from each other, and when they share ideas and they spend time together. We work into our calendar the concept of professional learning communities. You'll probably hear them as PLCs. PLCs will shut down if teachers get into a system where they feel like they're having to compete against each other for additional funds or additional income. And again, I know that that's something that we strongly believe in, and as a school district, it would really cut down on that collaboration aspect that we believe helps build the professional levels for all of our teachers.
You know, I'd only make one more comment there, which is that I know that Representative Bell, Van Dever, Ashby, and King met yesterday, I believe, and are dealing with the rural small school issue related to that and coming up with some solutions on that. So it's a little easier for Ailey, for Dallas, to create plans than it is for you know, Crosby or Huffman or some of these other small school districts. So we're going to work through that. Right, Mr. Ashby?
Absolutely. Sure.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Good afternoon. I'm Xavier Delatorre, day job superintendent of schools in the Ysleta Independent School District, serving 42,000 students in El Paso, Texas. Today, as the chair-elect for the Texas Urban Council of Superintendents, we believe we're the preeminent voice for traditional public school systems in the state of Texas. We meet regularly, discuss governance, school turnaround, leadership development, capital talent, and management, and made up of the following school districts: the Aldine Independent School District, the Austin Independent School District, Corpus Christi, Dallas ISD, El Paso ISD, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Ysleta. Together, in aggregate, we serve 800,000 of the 5.4 million students in this state. The most, one might argue, vulnerable and challenging students. 1 out of 5 students in Texas are in one of our school districts when it comes to socioeconomically disadvantaged or recessed realities. And when I speak to that, I think it's important to press upon you that we're not talking about students who qualify for free and or reduced lunches. We're talking about generational poverty, hyper-poverty. It's a different animal altogether. 1 out of 5 students in Texas who are African American attend one of our schools in one of our school districts. 1 out of 5 students who are Latino attend one of our schools in one of our 9 school districts. And more importantly, 1 out of every 5 English learners are educated in one of our 9 school districts. So we're very, very committed to being the preeminent voice for these traditional public school systems. We believe that we're the petri dish, the laboratory for finding ways to take students who have historically been underserved and underperformed in our public school system and cracking that code. Because if you can do it in one of these large, urban, diverse school districts, you can do it anywhere, but it will require resources. It's also an investment that will guarantee that we continue and enjoy the economic prosperity, the economic development, and the national security that we've enjoyed as a country for over 2 centuries. So we're important to the state of Texas, and we want to be involved in these conversations with all of you because, as I said, our most vulnerable students, most of them, or at least 1 in 5 of them, attend our school district. And so we do believe and are very appreciative of your consideration in acknowledging and embracing the increase to potentially the comprehensive education allocation. 3rd grade reading, as you know, is critical and is an indicator of providing students the type of experience that get them college, career, or military ready. Obviously, having 1 in every 4 students in the Isleta Independent School District and many of these school districts as English learners who are either non-English proficient or limited English proficient is a challenge that will require an investment of resources, so we support that agenda item. We're very much in favor of, and Dallas ISD and the Isleta Independent School District, as many of our other school districts in the coalition, already use our own local operating budget to provide a full-day pre-K program because it's important that students be school-ready when they arrive, and that can make a significant difference relative to the literacy agenda at the 3rd grade. And so we're very, very encouraged with what the committee is considering, but want to make sure that you all know that we're out there and that any significant increase or positive trajectory in our public school system is going to involve one of these 9 school districts, all of these 9 school districts, because those are the students that have traditionally been underserved. And what you're considering or what you have under consideration, it gives us some hope that resources, rather than be spread a mile wide and an inch deep, can be targeted at those students who need the additional resources and those teachers who need the additional resources, rather than spread it out and marginalize the impact. At this time, I'd like to introduce a man who needs no introduction, Superintendent of the Dallas.
I think we have a couple questions before you are off the hook. Ms. Gonzalez and then Chairman Dutton.
So Dr. De La Torre, it's a pleasure for you to be here. He's from my district, everyone, so it's a long way, so we're really grateful.
Thank you for having me. First time.
First time in the Capitol, right?
First time in the Capitol.
We're really happy to welcome to your Capitol. What I really am impressed with Isleta ISD particularly is, correct me, you're taxing at the cap, right? 1.17.
$1.17.
And so what Isleta has really been able to do with really some challenges is really meet some of our standards. And we were looking at the presentation from TEA, Isleta was ranking really high. And I know that in your presentation you talked about the weights and how would you like for the committee to look at the weights as part of our reforms. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that currently special education weights, for example, the money you get for your special education weight is what you need to actually educate special education students?
Well, I think as you've mentioned, in the Isleta Independent School District, we've made significant progress when it comes to 2 subgroups. The first being the English language learners who are performing at or above the state level at the meets expectation. for all intents and purposes in our school district, discounted and dismissed, approaching as not being college, career, military ready. So our focus is on making sure that students are performing at the meets and preferably at the masters. Our special ed students in every subject area at every grade level are outperforming the region and the state. So we're doing well with the resources we have, but as you know, special education has historically been underfunded, and the additional funding, I think, will allow us to avoid any kind of a plateau and take these students with special needs, as well as English language learners, to the next level, and that is to pursue that initiative where more and more students are performing at a college, career, military ready level.
And I think one of the things that we talked about was tax effort, right? So if it's let us at $1.17, but you're still in the lower bracket of funding across the state, another district who might be at $1.17 might be in a higher bracket. So tax effort match is really important, I think, as we talk about transforming the system, correct?
At present, we rely, I think, heavily on state revenue and state resources to operate our school district with 42,000 students and 6,000 employees.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're
and thank
welcome.
you for being here.
It's fun.
Oh, yeah?
So far.
Well, Chairman Dudden's about to ask you some questions. It may not be fun anymore. Be nice.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Well, let me start by thanking you for being here and joining my colleague in saying welcome to
Thank
your
you.
Capitol. I did have a question, though, and it's something that was bothering me. When you started your testimony, you talked about generational poverty. And I think I know what that means. It means that somebody didn't have any money. But I wondered what does that explain in terms of education?
Well, I think when I talk about generational poverty, or I call it hyper-poverty, is that oftentimes school districts receive resources based on the number of students, the percentage of students that are socioeconomically disadvantaged. That's triggered by those factors that make you either eligible or ineligible for a free and or reduced lunch. And in the case of a family of 4, you're looking at somewhere around $36,000 a year. In my school district along the Mexico-United States border, we have families that make $11,000 a year and $12,000 a year. So whereas we may have the resources to provide them with a sound academic experience, what happens after they leave our school, what happens in the afternoon can sometimes undo all of the good that we were able to accomplish that day. So we're talking about social-emotional learning, mental health, wraparound services for students who, once they leave our school and have received a free breakfast, free lunch, free after-school snacks, still return to a very economically recessed reality that is not conducive to promoting the American dream. It's foreign to them because they spend more time there than they do with us in school, which I think is to some extent what the gentleman on the end is saying, and that is we're not keeping our students long enough throughout the year, so any resources that would allow us to continue the school year into the summer, and not a summer school program or an enrichment program, would benefit these students. So when I say generational poverty, it means multiple generations of individuals being unable to access our current public school system or any school system that allows them to experience the social mobility that we hope our children experience, so that they go from one level to the next level, and as they experience that, it becomes more of a norm for that family. There's, I think, research out there that would indicate that the first time a child in a family gets into a college and or university, and especially once they complete a degree at a college and or university, it becomes highly, highly more likely that their siblings are going to follow in their footstep. But if you can't get that first child into that post-secondary experience and experience success at that level, then what typically happens is that cycle of poverty will continue on over a period of several generations until you crack the code.
Well, I just wanted to understand, because I think you were saying more about our funding model than you were about the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got it.
Or yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hinojosa.
Michael Hinojosa, Superintendent in Dallas, again and still. And I'm here back to testify in front of you, and I'm representing the Urban Council and the Dallas ISD. I'll pick it up with the appreciation. I do appreciate this task force that was bicameral, bipartisan, and had educators on it. A lot of people said they're never going to do anything. They meet, sometimes they don't even write a report because this is too hard. And then they say, well, if they write a report, they don't make any recommendations. And then if they say that, well, if they come up with recommendations, oh, they don't put any money behind it. So all of those myths have already been debunked to get to this point. And this committee is very well represented by 3 members of this committee that participated, or more, that participated significantly in that. So I do appreciate where you've been and what you've done to get us to this day. Also, a lot of people are underestimating something. Higher ed has a goal, 60 by 30. This commission is recommending 2 60 by 30 goals, one for 3rd grade reading and one for college and career readiness. But here's the irony. If you are economically advantaged, you'll be at 60 by 20 because you're almost there. But if you're economically disadvantaged, it'll take another decade. And these resources will help you get there if they're taken in consideration. If students can learn to read, then they can read to learn. If they don't, they get behind, and the cycle that Dr. De La Torre aptly described continues to happen. Second thing, I want to appreciate this committee's looking at the complexity of current year values. Now, I don't know that the other chamber has come to that conclusion, but thank you for coming to that conclusion. That creates one level of complexity. And I also want to make sure that we thank you for at least taking that into consideration. So what do we recommend and what do we commend? Similarly with the previous testimony, increasing the comp ed weight, that has a huge impact regarding exactly what you just said, Chairman Dutton. It's not the kids' fault, but it's the funding system fault that does not recognize that. Later, you're going to hear from San Antonio ISD, who has replicated the intensity of poverty. And we have that in Dallas, and we've figured out. And by the way, the state of Texas is 60% economically disadvantaged. But when you get into local communities in the 5th Ward, when you get in West Dallas, when you get in South Dallas, when you get in certain parts of San Antonio, and you get in certain parts of rural America where there has never been an opportunity to get out of that, when you recognize that and you put weights in the comp ed weight, there has a great potential. Now, of course, with every new index, we're going to figure out the laws of unintended consequences. Pre-K, thank you for doing that. There's a lot of mystery about that, but we've been doing this for 5 years. Now that we've been doing it for 5 years, we have significant data that kids that go to Dallas ISD Pre-K outperform kids that go to no Pre-K. Significantly. Our 3rd grade meets level is higher than the state. Our economically disadvantaged students are outperforming the state's economic disadvantage at the meets level at 3rd grade. Why? We've been investing $6 million new every year in Pre-K for the last several years. And now we're getting the results. It's taken a long time. And by the way, nobody except great teachers in Dallas got a raise for 3 years because we funded our strategic initiatives first. And then now that we've made it, our community has supported us. And no one is for higher property taxes, but a supermajority of our community voted for a 13-cent tax increase to help these kids get out of the cycle of poverty. The next one, dual language allotment. There's research. When I first went to Dallas in 2006, we had 1,300 classrooms that were not being served. Bilingual students were not being served. We had to blow up the system. We had to go to Puerto Rico, to Mexico, to Spain to get teachers. And we implemented a dual language program, biliteracy, where kids are literate in 2 languages, English and Spanish, and it can be not just for Latino kids. This can be for white kids, for African American kids, for second and third generation Latinos who don't speak Spanish, who can become biliterate. The research by Collier and Thomas is overwhelming. It's taken Dallas 15 years to get here. But now, with the dual language program, our students are outperforming the state. And in fact, I'm embarrassed to say that our English learners are outperforming some of our other student groups in Dallas, because we need to do better with some of our other student groups that are not performing as well. But this works, and you've recognized that. Dyslexia, that's a big issue. There's not enough money for everybody, but certainly we do appreciate the money that's being set aside to do that. 3rd grade reading allotment. And where are you putting it? In English learners and economically disadvantaged. And if you do that along with your comp ed weight, now 60 by 30 is a reality and not just a dream. A vision is a dream with a deadline, and if you put resources behind it, you've got a fighting chance to get there. Now, one of the other recommendations that we could live with over time is what's already been talked about. Current year values would cripple Dallas. The cost of education index would cripple a lot of places, but a lot of that depends on what you replace it with. Yes, I've been a superintendent in Texas since 1994. I had to take a little break to Georgia to get my rest, and I came back. But we've had the same CEI the whole time I was gone since 1994. And so I've known nothing else. I think the state, I think Austin, I think Dallas, I think the Valley, everybody looks different than the early 1990s when this was there. I was here when we did the high school allotment. I cheered for it. I was here when we did all these other allotments, but we added them on. So it may be time to do it. But the key is going to be in what is done with the basic allotment in the end. If you just slightly increase the basic allotment, you're just rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. If you significantly, and there is a number, I'm not going to tell you what that number is, but if there is a number that if you increase it to that amount, high tides raise all boats. Houston, Dallas, maybe Austin come out of 41. Everybody at this table benefits. But that's the key. And of course, I know we're early in the process. We don't have a bill yet, but this is going to be a huge key in addition to the other things you've come out with. Property tax relief. It is important. But 2/3 of our voters voted a tax increase because they saw what they were getting was something that they wanted for their community. So if it's the right stuff, and of course, property tax relief, you always got equity, and you always got adequacy, and how much does that money raise? And I've been a Chapter 41 superintendent, I've been a Chapter 42 superintendent, so you're not going to hear me whine about how much money we're not entitled to that we have to give away, because I've been on both sides of that table. This is complex stuff. But if you got caps, I've been told, well, the caps won't apply to you because we'll make you whole. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we'll see. Trust us. Let's look at the bill. Okay, I'm going to be quiet and wait and not opine further on property tax relief. So Dallas?
You promise?
For a little while. And for Dallas, there is a slide on Dallas. Educator excellence. I was a skeptic. It took me a long time to believe into it. Yes, I was with the whole issue that our esteemed superintendent, Dr. Williams, from my neighbor, came up about collaborative versus competitive. And we have our own professional learning communities. But what's very powerful is when we got outstanding teachers helping teachers who are not quite as outstanding. And we've been through all the work. We lost 60% of our workforce. But now we're keeping 90 to 95% of our best teachers. And the whole district is benefiting. It was very difficult to do. I've met with the commissioner for 2 hours to tell him this is what was done to make this thing work over time. It can work. It's not for everybody. And in fact, very few people have pulled it off. But it is possible. When you can get your best teachers to stay in the classroom and make significant dollars, it is possible. So that's something that we would certainly be in favor of. Third grade outcome funding, reading outcomes, it's intriguing. If you're not afraid of accountability, if you believe in your kids and you believe in your teachers, you'll be willing to try something like this. In fact, as I was hearing other superintendents testify, what would I do with that summer school money? I would make sure I took all of our students who are not ready to read at third grade and put them with our best teachers for the month of July so they would have a best chance to be successful in their third grade year. I could pay those best teachers a lot of money to make sure that we got to more outcomes, so if we got the outcomes, then we could put that money back into our system. I don't know if it's perfect. It is. There's a lot of pushback about this, but I'm willing to consider it, because there may be another opportunity to help our local community. And of course, the transportation allotment, Chapter 41 districts not eligible for transportation, that's something that would certainly benefit us. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, Mr. Chairman. I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Well, I appreciate everything that you've done. We had you up in front of us a lot. I know that you've improved. You had 40 IR campuses or 43 IR campuses, 3 or 4 years ago, and you have 3 now?
4.
I mean, that's just incredible. And you know what? You're right. There are people that are pushing back on the outcomes. And he's one of them sitting right there. But it's okay. And the way I think we're going to try and structure this is that we're going to try and make it, if you want to achieve and go get the money and provide the resources and be successful. I mean, the smart superintendent, I'm not saying you're not. But I'm saying I think that superintendents in generalities would say, we want to be collaborative about that. So we need to talk about it more, I think, is the most important thing, and figure out what metrics we're going to use. But, if there's $700 million, it's for the taking. I think people are going to try and figure out a way to get it, right?
Yes, sir.
I would think. So. Did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to make a statement. I just wanted to tell you thank you for letting everybody know there's nothing wrong with the children. But it is sometimes problems with what we're giving them. And when we change what we're giving them, sometimes we get a whole lot different student. And particularly in some of the inner cities in Dallas, inner part of Dallas. I followed some of the successes you've had there, and I really just want to say thank you, because it just proves that, sometimes the legislature can do those things that help. But I did want to ask one question, and this was something bothering me. I always ask the question of which demographic is at the bottom educationally. And everybody always knows the answer.
Yes, sir.
They always tell me black boys. And I always say, well, if everybody knows that, why do we never do anything about it? I mean, why do we accept that? And in the research I've done, that's true in about 34, 35 other states. And nobody seems to shine a light on it. Has Dallas done anything particularly related to them?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question, and that's what I was alluding to, that I was embarrassed that our English learners are outperforming our African-American students, and African-American males even more. We've had a mixed success with the African-American Success Initiative. This week at a retreat, my staff was presenting to me a new initiative where we can get more rigor to get more kids successful, more African-American males successful in advanced placement courses, because that's the bell star. If you can get that done, it'll raise everybody up. I'm embarrassed to tell you we're not doing well. That is our lowest performing student group as well. Right. But we're not just giving up. We've got to find different ways. And now when I have African American males getting on a bus to go to a P-TECH so they can partner with AT&T or Microsoft, some of those schools that were very under-enrolled are now getting students back because we're giving those communities things that they want. So we haven't solved the problem. In fact, that is probably our biggest disappointment. But that's something that we're not giving up on and something that we're continuing to work on.
Well, thank you.
Chairman, can I just...
Yeah, of course.
We're looking at that issue as well. One of the things that we're finding is attendance. It has a dramatic impact. This is going to not come as a shock to anyone, but if you're not in school, then you tend to lose whatever momentum or whatever we're trying to offer. So as we're looking at strategies and programs, one of the things that we have to look at before even we look at that is, are they coming to school? And sometimes, not all the time, some cases, African males have a higher absentee rate than others. Sometimes we have, this just depends, but there's a lot of factors. But if we get them to school, in some environments, that's the first step towards helping.
Well, that's why when I was talking to you earlier about the transportation part, they're less likely to get on a bus to go across town, and they're more likely to go to the school around the corner. And if we improve that school, then you're going to probably have a whole lot of success at dealing with that particular part of the population.
Yes.
Chairman, then we also want to amend our response, because at our A schools, well, we have 22% African-American students in Dallas ISD. At our A schools, they were above 50% African-American students, and those schools had significant gains. Many of those are elementary, and a couple were middle schools. But the high school is still the frontier that we haven't completely accomplished that.
Yeah, because in all the things in HSD, the school that we have for that's dominated by African American boys, the Mickey Leland School, is in my district, and it started out a few years ago, and now it is the top school in HSD. And so I say that because I just want everybody to know that it's an indicator that there's nothing wrong with the students again. But it is something wrong with what we give them. And when we give them the right recipe for education and educating them in particular, we get lots of success. And as your statement said, rising tide lifts all boats. And if they happen to be at the bottom and we raise them, gosh, we'll see really an education miracle in Texas.
Yes.
Thank you. I echo the point of Chairman Dutton, and I have a bill you might like. Question for you. My understanding when it comes to dual language that it is the gold standard, it is the approach that works best, but it's also a very hard, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a very hard program to scale, and to do it statewide I think is a challenge. It's a worthy goal that we've set, but it's tough. What, as districts, other districts are waiting or trying to implement a large-scale, widespread dual language program, what is, let's say, the silver standard? What could we do to improve ELL outcomes while districts wait to recruit the teachers they need and assemble classes the right way to do dual language?
I think everyone needs to be quite honest with themselves, because that same Collier and Thomas research will tell you that the worst program, worse than no program, is the ESL pull-out program, where you just take kids out for a little bit and try to give them something. They're getting no substance.
Right.
So what we had to do, because we had that problem when we first started this in Dallas in 2006, we decided to go, and this was very traumatic to our teachers. We didn't have enough classrooms to fill at 5th grade bilingual, so we bit the bullet. We just moved all those teachers, every bilingual teacher we had that we could find, we moved them to pre-K, K1, and then we started growing up with the system. And we survived over time. And now we have a secondary dual language. We even have a high school where you can get a dual language certificate. But it took us 12 to 13 years to implement dual language. But we knew we needed to quit having this Swiss cheese approach and a kid would go to a 4th grade bilingual, then the next school they wouldn't have a 5th grade bilingual teacher, so they would lose out on instruction. Right. And so we decided, let's compress down to the bottom and build our way back up. And then we went out and hired the staff. Now we have 4 P-Techs that we have grow our own. We won't have to go to Puerto Rico and Spain and Mexico. We can go to Oak Cliff and get our teachers, because we have them in our own P-Techs where we're developing our future bilingual teachers. So you can start with teacher assistants and try to get them to become teachers. But at some time, you got to have a strategy. Where do you start for the best long-term gain? And superintendents don't get to stay around a long time if they're not achieving. So it takes a gamble to do something for the long term, just like it takes a gamble for you to do something for 2030 here with some of the funding initiatives that you have.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman.
One thing that is scalable,
Yes,
because there's, as you know, there's multiple dual language ways of implementing.
Right.
But like one-way dual language, if you have the bilingual teachers that Michael's describing, that is scalable. We're contemplating that right now in our district, just eliminating bilingual as we know it and going one-way dual.
Right.
So there are ways to do it with the resources.
So if and just for everyone else who's going to testify, my general question is going to be a recognition that dual language is the gold standard, and then as districts pursue that, what is the silver standard? What should we be aspiring to have our students in while they wait to get to a full dual language program? Only because you're right, there are some strategies that clearly don't work the way they're supposed to. That's my question. I appreciate that, both of you. Thank you, Chairman.
Just to topper some of the same, and that is that we've had a dual language program across the district for over 20 years, and we offer one-way dual language, two-way dual language, and it really depends on the demographics in that particular learning community. We're organized by learning communities, and when you have enough monolingual English speakers to complement the monolingual Spanish speakers, you can provide that two-way dual language program. So the silver standard would be a one-way dual language program where more of the responsibility is laid at the teacher's feet with the help of an aide to try to provide the English that the students need, but to do it in a very prescriptive and systemic way over grade levels until they're speaking 50-50 and they're bilingual and biliterate.
Okay, and it seems that you guys agree on that. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Mr. Meyer.
Quickly before we move on, Dr. Hinosa, I just wanted to thank you. You did a great job of thanking all of us. But as you mentioned earlier, superintendents and trustees don't stick around very long when they try some things that are innovative. I have to tell you, this session, throughout this entire session during the interim, what I kept hearing as the gold standard is DISD. And it took your leadership, it took the leadership of Dr. Flores and the Board of Trustees to do that. And so now we're taking a look at modeling the entire state off of what you have done and the great work you have done in Dallas. And so on behalf of all of us, thank you for your hard work and your perseverance. It has certainly paid off. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Two comments, takeaways for both of you, for all of you. One is you've all expressed concerns about outcomes and things of that nature. I really believe it's critical for us to stay focused on that as we go forward. So when you have ideas or whatever concepts you think are something that should be a part of what we're going to do on a go-forward basis, make sure you know how to get a hold of us, obviously. And Amy and talk to us, and Andrea's sitting over there, and talk to us about that as we go forward. I think that's important. You know, and I'm sure you all are going to probably answer yes, but just I want you, and maybe you don't have to answer, and this may be for other superintendents in the room, but the question is this: do you know who your best teachers are? Do you absolutely know every single one of them in your district? And if the answer is no, and I don't know if it is or not. You want to answer?
I would say we know who they are. I don't know. I would bet 100%. But yeah, we know who they are.
Okay. Yeah. But I think we'll find as we go through this process that the changes we're making will make holistic differences, right? You know, for improvement. You know, and so part of it is the mentoring and things like that. I mean, that's the focus of what we're trying to accomplish, is finding out who our best teachers are as we go forward. And then, you know, I hear what Representative Bernal is saying, but I worked for a guy one time named Boone Pickens, and he had a famous saying, and he used to say, "When's the best time to plant a tree? Today. When's the next best time? Tomorrow." So while it's hard to do things and it takes time to do things, this whole plan is going to come together because we're going to do it at one time. We're going to bite the bullet and we're going to go forward. So I think that's important to know. So any other questions for this panel? All right, well, that was crook. All right, thank you. We only have 5 other panels for the rest of the day. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Yeah. Okay, next up, Tracy Fisher, trustee, Coppell ISD. Dr. Scott Murray with superintendent, Pursuing Branch ISD. Lacey Freeman, superintendent, Buffalo ISD. And Dr. Edwin Flores, trustee, Dallas ISD. Same deal. Please tell us who you are. Diego. I gotta go.
Bookends. Oh, hey, good. How are you? Good. Oh.
Start here?
Tracy Fisher. Okay.
All right. Let's keep it going so we allow people the chance to present. We ask questions and people get out of here at a decent time. I think we're going to start with Ms. Fisher.
Yes.
All right.
All right. I'm Tracy Fisher, and I am here from Coppell ISD. I'm actually speaking on behalf of TASB, myself, and Coppell ISD. I am currently the school board president there. And very briefly, I wanted to give some background on Coppell and point out some areas of the commission report that would benefit our students. We have a few. We have about 13,000 students. Coppell has been a Chapter 41 district since the designation began in 1992. This year, the district's recapture payment will equal approximately 30% of the general fund budget. In 2011, our community overwhelmingly approved a $1.17 tax rate. It was a 13% increase. And I will just tell you, we are maxed out in terms of property taxes. Thankfully, we are growing and have been able to offset a little of that recapture. However, every dime of property value growth last year was given back to the state. We got nothing. And part of that is because it's in arrears. So current year would help us a lot. As a Chapter 41, we received no transportation allotment. Our transportation costs have doubled in the past 2 years to over $4 million because of the Dallas County Schools shutdown. This year, we will receive a total of $10 million in state aid. We will send back $45 million to the state in the form of recapture. While the transportation allotment update won't help us recoup all the money we send to the state, it would provide some relief to our stressed budget. So thank you for that recommendation. We greatly appreciate Representative Van Dever's property tax relief bill, House Bill 735, which allows the flexibility to raise and lower our tax rate between voter-approved rates. This would allow us to lower our tax rate when we can, and we would. Community is important to us, so much so that the City of Coppell pays for 100% of our school resource officers and crossing guards. Families and parents move to our community because of our schools. We have high community engagement and high parent expectations. We spent last year on the strategic design plan where we asked our community what they valued in education. We had over 4,000 responses to our surveys and 60 in-depth interviews with stakeholders, which included teacher, current and former parents, current and former students, administrators, and local community members. These values represent not only what makes CISD unique, but also areas of improvement centering on the themes of engagement, relationship, great teaching, and redefining success. I think we handed out something like this. It just gives you our story. The redefining success popped up pretty high, and that's right, like colleges and universities, our community doesn't care about high-stakes testing. We believe that outcomes-based funding doubles down on high-stakes testing. We are accountable to our community, and we are every day, I assure you. 6 years ago, only a few of our seniors took the ACT test. We felt that that's an important assessment. All of our juniors take the test now, and our students do as well as the few that used to take it. We're very proud of that. Our kids they've all risen because of that test. Today's third grade STAR reading levels, they measure reading levels beyond third grade. Meeting grade level is now 4th to 5th grade reading level. Shouldn't the highest score of a third grade STAR evaluate a third grade reading level and not 4th grade reading level? It has to do with the lexiles that are used in the cut scores and where that is. I'm sure somebody else will talk about that today. It's extremely detrimental to Texas. We shouldn't base funding on STAR test results. Please keep accountability and testing issues separate from school finance. We want to be accountable, I can assure you. We just don't want to be accountable in the wrong way. We have to serve all children and not just those that do well. And in Coppell, I will assure you that we don't only care about our kids. We care about all kids because all kids affect all of us. It's an investment. We ask our community, when we got our A rating in Coppell, we asked our community to reject the rating because what we're trying to do for kids benefits them so much more than any letter grade. We've identified high priority learning standards and focusing on the hundreds of, we've identified the high priority learning standards versus focusing on hundreds of TEKS. Our teachers have more time to create authentic learning experiences. Our kids run into school as fast as they run out of school. To me, that's a great leading indicator that we can work with on school progress. So, by the way, is teacher well-being. That's an important piece for our district, and I know it is for everyone, as teachers are under a lot of pressure. Many of us in North Texas and throughout the state are working on community-based accountability. Each community is unique and deserves to work with the commissioner to ensure taxpayers are being considered, but mostly that students and teachers are growing and not being stunted by inappropriate high-stakes tests. I want to thank you for your work on behalf of our 5.3 million children in the state. You have a daunting task, but I believe that a great partnership between the legislature and fellow elected school boards will create positive, lasting impact on the future of our state. One of the things that we also have there for you, this is our story. It's an official magazine. Everybody tries to inform their community about what's going on. What's important about this, we didn't pay for this because we don't have the resources to pay for everything that we do, unfortunately. None of us do. And when you're maxed out, it's hard to tell your community that you produced a magazine like this with their taxpayer dollars. So just wanted to let you know that that came from another source. I guess with that, if there's any questions, I know this is a shift in what we've been talking about, but well-being is a huge priority for us in Coppell. We have 3 fully funded crisis counselors above our counselors that we have in our schools. And the reason we have that is because we've needed that. And quite frankly, we all need that.
All right, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Right.
Members, any questions? Your crisis counselors, or I think in some places they call them trauma counselors, they serve both students and
Yes,
employees?
they do. Absolutely.
And there's a need for both?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, ma'am,
All right.
very much.
Thank you.
All right. Whoever wants to go next.
Yes. Scott Murray, Superintendent, Spring Branch Independent School District. I want to begin with really thanking the committee for investing a significant amount of time, energy, and effort into focusing upon the needs that public schools across the state of Texas have and investing specifically in school finance. Thanking also the School Finance Commission for the significant amount of work that was done during that 9-month period of time, and also lifting up the Speaker Bonin, and our Governor and Lieutenant Governor, who have publicly said school finance is the priority this session. So to all of you, we appreciate it on behalf of the 5.4 million children in the state of Texas. Your communication of that priority is well received. In Spring Branch ISD, we support solutions that benefit not just the 35,000 kids in our system, but the 5.4 million across the state of Texas. And so today is, through my comments, you'll hear me talking specifically about solutions that benefit everybody, Chapter 41s and Chapter 42s alike. That's what's important today in Texas. I want to, about 6 or 7 months ago, received an email, and it was a congratulatory email. Congratulations, Dr. Murray. Spring Branch ISD is #1 on the list. And when you see that you're #1 on the list, you become a little bit excited. Hey, that's great. And then you begin to read, so what list is this that we are #1 on? And as I read the email a little further, I was no longer excited, because Spring Branch ISD is the %1 district in the state of Texas for recapture growth since the year 2009. Recapture in Spring Branch has increased by 1,600% since we started paying. And so I was no longer thrilled when I read that email, but recapture is a significant burden. And it delighted us to see that the School Finance Commission and this body is looking at recapture and addressing that in a healthy way. Our board chairman, Huberty, actually spoke to this last week. The Board of Trustees in Spring Branch ISD is not able currently to seek tax increases from our public, simply because of the impact of recapture. So much of a tax increase would come back to the state of Texas through recapture that our trustees do not feel it is fair and just of our taxpayers to face an increase, knowing that the majority of those dollars would come to the state of Texas. And so we're limited. We are capped currently because of the plight of recapture, and so we certainly support a relief to those districts that pay recapture, but solutions that benefit, again, 41s and 42s. So specifically looking at the Finance Commission recommendation considerations, there are some things that I think and that we believe as an organization will be healthy for everybody. Increasing the basic allotment. That benefits all children in the state of Texas. It decreases recapture, but it benefits every child that we serve within our state. Formula funding, increasing the formula funding for economically disadvantaged students, for our English learners, for programming funding, increasing programming funding for career and technical education. That type of funding, again, benefits very specific types of children, and in a Chapter 41 recapture district, it also helps us with the recapture perspective. So that's a win-win opportunity. We certainly support that type of thing. Investing in post-secondary opportunities, so thinking about that state 60 by 30 goal in Spring Branch ISD, we have a similar goal. We call it T24. Our goal for every student in Spring Branch is that they experience, after 6 years, success in the military, a technical institution, or have a 2 or 4 year degree. In fact, this year we're celebrating the class of 2012 and their successes, because 6 years ago they graduated from high school, but 6 years after it, we hope that they have completed one of those 4 opportunities. And so we would encourage the Commission to think about investments in some post-secondary opportunities, such as funding the ACT, SAT opportunities for all of our students across the state of Texas, funding dual enrollment and dual credit courses for students across the state of Texas. So providing those opportunities at the secondary level that would help our kids be a little bit more successful as they leave us and travel into a post-secondary world. We agree with Chairman Huberty, and again, we heard that conversation today about prior year values. In our system, we see if we used current year values, that would clearly have an impact upon us financially. So we appreciate the consideration and potentially the direction to keep using prior year values. The CEI, as we look at the CEI and the elimination of that, it raises concern because we suspect it would have some, we know it would have significant impact on our budget. However, what we don't know is the rest of the story. And so this trust yet verify opportunity, we trust that the Commission, or the committee, as you look at CEI and its replacement, that you will factor in considerations. You look at specifically how removal of the CEI will affect districts across the state, and also recognizing that there are cost differences between different places in the state of Texas, and understanding formulaically that it would be important that we factor in those cost differences from different parts of our state. Have an elementary school in our system that this year they received 60 new students, and these new students came to them pre-K through 5th grade. So they ranged, really, we start educating kids in Spring Branch at the age of 3, so we have 3-year-old pre-K. So they range from 3 to about the age of 11 or 12. And these 60 students came from a country in Latin America. These students did not speak English and they did not speak Spanish, and so they were new to this particular school. And again, their ages ranged from pre-K through 5th grade. And so our school this year had a wonderful opportunity to address not only the academic needs of these kids, but the significant social and emotional needs of these children. Not only did they not speak our languages, but they also had never been in school. And so an 11-year-old student that had never been in any type of school situation. And so our elementary school had to address, and continues to today, to address the needs of those 60 children. If we looked at the outcomes for those kids come May, not a single one of those kids will hit the meets level on the STAR exam. I can guarantee you that, because none of those children have ever been in any kind of schooling experience. They do not speak the English language, nor do they speak Spanish, and so even taking an assessment like that will be challenging for those kids. Yet, I can guarantee you that every single one of those children have grown significantly under the tutelage of amazing teachers and a really great principal. And so as we think about tying outcomes to students, any type of student, we have that gives us pause, because I can tell you that those students would not meet the meet standard on the STAR today, but I can also confirm that those kids have grown a lot during the time that they've been with us in our system. And so I would have concern about tying outcomes for kids specifically to a standardized test. I've lived that. I am not originally from the state of Texas and have been in other states where dollars were tied to outcomes for children, and I have seen what that creates. I have watched teachers close their door. I have watched teachers who stop sharing their information because the work that they do with children is tied to their paycheck, and outcomes are tied to kids. I've watched children and the stress that they experience having to leave school in the middle of an exam because the stress that we place upon them to do well, because your your success is tied to the dollars that we receive as an institution. I can assure you, however, that if we tie outcomes to results for children, specifically on a standardized test, that we will see results go up in mathematics and reading. I can assure you of that. We will prepare kids for jobs, and they'll be successful in those jobs as long as those jobs involve taking tests. But I'm not sure that that's what jobs require of our students today. And if we want to create mathematicians and scientists and engineers and doctors and future teachers and educators, then we need to make sure that learning is happening. And I will be the first to attest that we are still challenged in public education today to think of the many different measures that we must use to paint a clear picture of the growth and development of our children. But if we tie outcomes to a single measure and tie dollars to a single measure, we are headed down a road that would concern me as an educator. I think the unintended consequences of that would be significant in our schools, and that's not a place that I would like us to be. Learning is critical. Accountability is important, but as we think about measuring, we need to do that in a right way, and that is still a body of work that we engage in education. Tying teachers, tying our teacher compensation to student outcomes would, again, be a concern. I think, and I've heard conversation today, there are great ways. The question was asked earlier, can we identify the great teachers in our system? Absolutely we can. We have a plethora of measures that we use in education today that allow us to determine the very best teachers. We have a program in our system today that we call Opportunity Culture. In fact, I just got a picture a few minutes ago. We have a group of these teachers and their administrators meeting at this very moment talking about their next opportunity. Opportunity Culture allows us to recognize our very best teacher. We expand their scope. We actually allow our very best teachers to teach more students so that more kids in our system have access to better teachers. Those teachers also have access to their peers. So not only do they teach a larger group of students, they also have access to their colleagues and share their wisdom and knowledge with their peers. And so we call that Opportunity Culture, a wonderful way to recognize our best and to allow them to teach more kids and share their knowledge with their peers. That's a way that we could provide a differentiated compensation to teachers. So we would fully support opportunities for the local school districts to think about ways of compensating teachers that more effectively meet their needs and our needs as an organization. And lastly, I would encourage you to think more broadly about outcomes. And I would use pre-K as an example. So pre-K is an input. It is an opportunity when students travel through pre-K. It is an input. It provides a wonderful basis on which for them to build their K-12 and post-secondary experience. But we could also see pre-K as an outcome, as a measure, because the research says when our children have a high-quality pre-K experience, their outcome is improved. And so thinking about the inputs that are research-based, go back to Mr. Bernal, and you talked about one-way dual or dual language, absolutely gold standard. The silver standard there is your movement towards a one-way dual language program. So those programming, those research-based best practices that we could see both as inputs and outcomes, I would encourage you to consider as you think about tying dollars to outcomes. There are some broad ways to think about those opportunities. Lastly, I say thank you. Thank you for your attention today. Thank you for the great questions that you ask. And again, thank you for keeping public schools in the state of Texas at the forefront of decision making. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Good questions? I was going to ask you, what is your tax rate now?
We're $1.17.
You went all the way to $1.17.
Oh, no. Sorry, we're at $1.09.
$1.09.
Yeah,
Okay,
$1.09. Yeah, we in order for us to go to $1.17 before you came in, I'm sorry about that. You alluded to this last week. Our trustees would have a difficult time because the vast majority of that money would come here in form of recapture. So we're at $1.09.
How much? What is do you know what your percentage of wealth is by chance?
I do not.
Okay.
No.
What would your recapture be? If you raise your taxes beyond that, what would you send back?
So our recapture today, our payment, our budget is a little under $350 million. We'll send $88 million in recapture. $88 million this year in recapture. We're at 92 next year, and we over $100 million the year after that if recapture continues for us. So, and I shared a statistic right before you got in. From 2009 to 2019, our recapture has increased by 1,600%. So the largest in the state of Texas. So we've seen a significant increase. Yeah. So this relief is appreciated by our community.
Absolutely. Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Lacey Freeman, Superintendent at Buffalo ISD. I want to thank you up front for all the time and effort you put in to try to make our schools a better place all over the state. Just a little bit about Buffalo ISD. We're located on Interstate 45, halfway between Houston and Dallas, a small 3A. We have approximately 950 kids on any given day, and so a little bit different up here from what you've seen so far with the big guys, I guess you would say. So that's part of the issues that you face, the size and difference of what's going on all over the state makes it tough. And so we have approximately 150 employees. Our M&O tax rate is $1.17. So I'm here today representing Texas Association of Community Schools, and going to, from my perspective, from Buffalo ISD perspective, I guess, talk a little bit about small school and mid-size adjustment, performance pay and outcome-based funding. And so first up, regarding the small and mid-size adjustment, we do recognize and applaud that scalable function of our system. It's very important to us. And for those of you, if you were here 2 years ago and had anything to do with changing the multipliers for those schools under 300 square miles, I thank you. That has been very helpful and very beneficial. So we do recognize those economies of scale, whether it be how many kids we can put in a physics class. In a large school district, you can put the numbers in there to make it pay for itself, to support it. In a class of 70 high school seniors, you may not have but 12 to 15 kids that need that upper level class. So it's not pulling the weight that they are in these guys classes whenever they can fill it up. So small mid-size adjustment is very important in our eyes. Next thing, talking about performance pay, the way I see it, we're looking at one class of employee. We have a completely different situation in Buffalo, America. We are looking for certified employees. We have, in my opinion, a serious shortage of teachers in the small school areas, certified teachers. And so our starting salary, our base salary is $34,000. The average for the state is between 41 and 42 at this time. So that makes it very tough when you go to Menard Johnson Coliseum in Huntsville, Texas, down on the Florida Job Fair, and you plop down your sign, "Come work for us," and say an Aldine is next to you with 50 whatever, a lot more than what 34 is, I'll say that, or whoever it might be. It makes it very tough. So we have a lot different situation than some of the big schools that have been up here so far. So we have employees that by the time their TRS health insurance is taken out, I'm talking about custodial maintenance, things like that. I don't know how they make it. By the time those things are taken out, they're literally working for insurance. And so, and I say all this not as a whiny part, I guess. It's just that we need focus in all of these areas as far as monetary help to help in these areas, instead of recognizing that upper level teacher, I guess you would say. So